Here's another example. So in the Pearl of Great Price, Joseph Smith history, Joseph says he returned the plates to the messenger by prior arrangement. But Brigham Young said he returned the plates to the Hill Cumorah. So there's another discrepancy. But it makes sense if you realize that he was talking about the abridged plates that he returned to the messenger, as we saw from the David Whitmer account. And he was talking about the plates of Nephi that he and Oliver returned to the repository in Cumorah.
Okay.
So Brigham Young and Joseph Smith were both accurate, but they were talking about two different sets of plates.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another one of those discrepancies in church history that's easily resolved once you understand there's two sets of plates.
Okay, folks. I told you that Jonathan Neville was going to be a reoccurring guest. I told my wife that your face reminds me of the smiling sun on the temples. You have that very calm, serene smile. Jonathan's like, whatever, dude, get out of here.
Yeah.
Anyway, I am thankful for you to come back. Here's what I want to do.
Okay.
But we were talking about, before I get into this, we were talking about scholars and their biasness.
Yeah.
We brought up Matt Harris. It was an awesome interview. You said it was great.
That was fantastic. Yeah.
He does, but it's interesting because we have different biases on motive, not just motivation, but what conclusion. And what I mean by that, go ahead. What do I mean by that?
Well, last time we talked about the faith model of facts, assumptions, inferences, and theories. And, Matt, like everyone else, looks at facts, those letters from Ezra Taft Benson and Hugh B. Brown, for example. And then he makes assumptions and draws inferences. We all do that. And I think it was fascinating for him to bring out those facts that most people aren't aware of. I hadn't really known much about that correspondence. You and I were talking about how I have a friend that I correspond with fairly regularly, and we've been friends for decades. We're great friends. We've traveled together and stuff. And yet, if someone was to read our correspondence, particularly if they took one or two of them out of context,
right,
they would think that we hated each other, or were mortal enemies or something. And it's just the nature of a relationship. Sometimes you feel real strongly about something. It doesn't affect your personal relationship.
Absolutely. And it shouldn't. Well, for one, we're of the same faith. And it's, when I was young, when we're young in the church, we have this idea that if we're all Latter-day Saints, we should all be seeing eye to eye and we should all be getting along, and that we all believe the same doctrine.
Right.
And I thought everybody was like that. But as you get older and mature, you see that it's not like that. And it's not like that all the way to the top, even.
You're right. It's the definition of one heart and one mind, right? And so being of one mind doesn't mean you agree on everything any more than you have to all have the same favorite color or favorite car or favorite movie. So you can disagree about things, but the being of one mind is that you agree that you want to understand one another and work together.
Yeah.
Regardless of your individual opinions and stuff. And so that's what I think that, this no more contention thing, focusing on clarity, charity, and understanding, is the same idea. Is that we want to be of one mind, don't have any reason to have personal animosity towards one another, and enjoy the differences, vive la différence, as the French say. But it's kind of,
how do you say that again? Say it again.
Vive la différence.
What does that mean?
Well, it's a gender, usually it's male and female thing, but it's in any differences. If you have different political views, it's fascinating. It's far more fascinating and enjoyable to try to understand one another than to try to convince one another.
Right. No, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. On the opposite side, though, people love arguing and controversy. It's what makes things exciting, right? The newspaper motto is, if it bleeds, it leads. And so the more violent and confrontational a thing is, the more clicks it attracts. That's human nature. But
right.
I think it's also more pleasant and more productive for people to seek understanding instead of trying to convince or I get the sense that a lot of these scholars, not Matt Harris, but I'm talking about the ones that we'll talk about today, presumably, feel a little insecure in their beliefs, and they feel like the more other scholars agree with them, the more comfortable they are with their beliefs. And it's, in a way, it's sad that people feel that way, because if you go by a majority vote, the vast majority of the world is not going to be LDS, right? Or
Right.
even Christian. So majority vote's kind of a poor way to approach the truth.
Well, and it's sad too that even the group think the group think can create bias where bias shouldn't be.
Yeah.
For instance, you might have scholars that really disagree on some things, but because maybe it's job security or it's this is my mentor and I don't disagree with him. It could be many different things. And then everybody, there's an elephant in the room, which is this is something maybe we don't believe, but we're all saying we believe it because we're afraid to check. It's almost like communism where you're afraid. Nobody really agrees what's going on with this. This is a bad law or bad policy, but no one's going to speak up against it. It's kind of like that with the scholars. No one's going to speak out against the elephant in the room, which is bad doctrine or false doctrine or whatever, or a false narrative.
When we were teaching in China, one of the requirements we had is we could never mention the 3 T's, and that's Tibet, Tiananmen Square, and Taiwan.
Really?
Yeah, we can never use those words in class.
Oh, wow.
And those are very sensitive topics, obviously, for the Communist Party, the government there.
Yeah.
And so that and a few other things were just forbidden to even bring up or discuss.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I know. And we run into those kind of things in our own culture, both national culture and church culture.
Well, guess what? I have a friend that put me in connection with someone that works at CES, and they're going to come on and talk to me a little bit about CES.
Excellent.
Which if some of you don't understand that acronym, that's the church education system. These are the people that write our curriculum. They're the people that write Come Follow Me. And we're going to find out, how involved are they with the brethren in their committees in establishing, I guess, I wouldn't even say doctrine, but that's what I wanted to ask you before we get started, though.
Sure.
How much do you feel that I'm a Generation X. What would you classify you as, a boomer?
I'm a baby boomer, yeah.
But you're on the younger baby boomer end.
Yeah.
I mean, you graduated in the 70s?
Yeah.
Okay.
From high school. Yeah.
Right. So, and I graduated in the 80s. Here's the deal. What we believed, here's my question to you. And it's kind of broad because I want to get started. But I have time if you do. Because I want to talk about number 9. Number nine.
Is that the Beatles song?
Yes. I want to go down from reframing church history. I want to talk a lot about the restoration, reframing the plates, reframing the translation, reframing the witnesses, DNC 10, and going into the Urim and Thummim. But before we do that, because that's fascinating stuff to me, and we're going to revisit these things in the future, maybe nibble on some things that we didn't nibble on as much over here, and da-da-do-da-do.
And da-da-do-da-do.
But anyway, speaking on Generation X and you being a boomer, there was a time, and let's say from the 1950s, the Bruce R. McConkie, Joseph Fielding Smith years. I consider myself, well, only because somebody said I needed to classify myself. Well, I mean, it's inferred that we classify ourselves now as in the scholarly world, even though you and I aren't credentialed scholars. I still consider myself a neo-scholar and you are a neo-apologist. How much do you think of what we believed in the last 50 decades has been urban legend or doctrine. What I mean is,
Yeah,
have we believed things are doctrine when we shouldn't be believing that they're doctrine?
probably. I
Give
mean,
me some
it's almost
examples.
inescapable.
Do you have any examples?
Well, when Matt Harris was talking about Ezra Taft Benson and some of the communism stuff, he gave a few examples of that. I don't remember the name of the document that he referred to where he accused someone of being a communist who wasn't, and things like
Okay.
that. So, I mean, it's inherent in the human condition that we all believe things that we were raised with, and only to find out later that maybe they weren't right or they were misinterpreted, that type of thing. So part of the process of growing up is realizing that truth is more evasive, let's say, than we thought when we were younger.
Right.
And it's generational as well as individual.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because, were you going to say something good?
One example that comes to mind is when I was growing up, my uncle had a bomb shelter in his backyard that we went into. He's all stocked with stuff, and we used to practice nuclear drills in case the Russians sent a missile at us. Yeah, you have to get under your desk and stuff, which obviously wouldn't have helped.
The Red Scare.
Yeah, definitely. And it was a real scary thing. In fact,
right.
The first time I met a Russian, I was in college, and I had gone to this conference where there was some Russian scientists or something. And I went up and talked to one of them, and I was actually physically a little afraid to talk to a Russian because of what I've been trained up with. Well, part of that's because when I was a Boy Scout, we lived in Germany, and we were at a scout camp just a few miles from the Czech Republic when the Russians invaded with all their tanks and stuff. And so we grew up just being terrified of Russians. Well, much later, one time I was in Moscow, I worked with a company there, and they took me to a park where there's a big ICBM aimed at the United States. It didn't have nuclear warheads in it, but it was kind of a monument. And I said, what were you guys thinking, aiming all this stuff at us? And they said, well, what do you mean? You guys started it. It's a whole different dynamic.
Right.
We could joke about it now, but when I was young, it was a real everyday thing, that we were all afraid of. And obviously, nuclear war never happened, but that's an example of a fear or a belief that I had growing up that was founded on what politicians were trying to alarm us about. But now that I'm older, I realize that it was more a military-industrial complex thing.
Well, and not to get off on that tangent, but because we need to digress, but I do believe that we were wrong in the sense that Ezra Taft Benson had a lot of knowledge on that. That's where I believe he had the experience working in Washington, so he would be one to know more than any of his brethren that, hey, there's a problem here, and I'm trying to warn you guys and wake you up to your Book of Mormon awful situation.
And it's another example of his warnings were maybe contributed or helped to eventually lead to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the dissipation of communism in that part of the world.
Right.
And if he hadn't made those warnings, not that he was the only one, but he was one of several that were making those warnings. And earlier this year, my wife and I went to Eastern Europe, traveled everywhere. Everything was awesome, fantastic countries. We went through Albania, where they have all these underground bunkers. Another place that I was afraid of when I was young, and now it's all open. And how much could you attribute that to the warnings of people like Ezra Taft Benson?
Right. Well, and he found, because J. Reuben Clark, which kind of came before, a little before Ezra, he was older than Ezra, was warning about communism. So was David O. McKay. What Ezra Taft Benson did is he came back and said, no, there's a Western corruption too.
Right.
And so that's the military-industrial the military-industrial complex fits into that narrative. So, I think it was hard for some of the brethren to wake up to that, because they're like, well, we understand there's communism, but you're saying there's a conspiracy to overthrow our Constitution. Come on, baloney. And maybe they weren't, because they're not all seeing, all powerful men. We know they're prophets, seers, and revelators, but that's also probably when the Lord wants them to see something. It's not like on every aspect of life. And so they are, in a sense, not born in cultural vacuums, as we like to say.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then I'll get into this right now. But to wrap this part up is, I do believe that too. I think that some of the things that Bruce R. McConkie taught, we thought were doctrine. I mean, when I was on my mission, one out of 3 companions would have Bruce R. McConkie's Mormon doctrine in their
Right.
suitcase,
Sure,
and pull it out, mark it up, and that was doctrine. Well, of course, and my brother said we need an app called Ask Bruce.
Yeah.
But
well,
anyway,
and I'm glad you brought that up, because at the time that was kind of quasi church doctrine. Everybody referred to that.
right.
And then later, some of those things got changed or clarified. And today, the gospel topics essays perform a similar function, where people think they're doctrine. And right in the introduction, it explains these are not doctrine. These are just, helpful guidelines, kind of like Bruce R. McConkie's Mormon doctrine in that day is what the gospel topics are today.
It can almost become a similar sacred cow, right?
Yeah. And they're subject to change. They have been changed, and they're subject to change in the future. So, people that quote to me, often some of my critics will say, well, it says right in the gospel topics essay, therefore you're wrong. And I'm saying, well, the gospel topics essays aren't doctrine.
They're not doctrine.
They're hardly scriptures. They're written by scholars for scholars, basically.
They're basically a response for scholars, and if members of the church, it's the best the brethren are. They're like, look, we're not scholars, but if you need an answer to something, here you go. This is the best we can do. And they'll even, but not one of those 15 men will go, if it's not in the temple recommend questions. Right?
Well, none of them.
Do you believe
well, they're all anonymous anyway, so nobody is taking credit for them, and that's why they change them from time to time without even notifying anybody, without showing the changes. They just modify them to update them.
Right.
And so, to me, that's why I have a couple of chapters on reframing the gospel topics essays in this book, because people tend to think they're like gospel doctrine the same way we thought Bruce R. McConkie's book Mormon doctrine was, and they're not. The doctrine is the standard works. And
that's it.
The next one below that probably is General Conference talks, because those have changed over the years as well. And so the gospel topics essays don't even register in terms of doctrine.
Well, and that's why I wanted to use that to segue into this, because that's what you're doing here. When you have your old, I love how every chapter, folks, he's got old response and what do you call the other one? Current response? You have old response and you have new response.
Well, I have, some of them are different. I have what the critics would say, and then what the old narratives and the reframe.
I mean, narrative, not response. Old narrative and then the reframe.
And some of them would be old critical narratives and old faithful narratives.
Yeah.
And then what the reframe is. Yeah.
And your proof, and that's why I brought up, urban legend, mythology in the church, how we confuse, and us as lay members of the church and many others that don't know what the scholars know, we walk around believing that the lost 10 tribes are literally lost 10 tribes up in the snow somewhere, and that their Gandalf wizard prophet is going to lead them back when the flutes are blown or something like that. Something romanticized like that.
Sure.
When all the way back to B.H. Roberts, he's saying, no, that's kind of what Orson Pratt was teaching sometimes too. But what that's why it's an ongoing restoration, because these men, they're maturing spiritually. The church is maturing spiritually. But they still spoke by the Holy Ghost. Even though they didn't understand the devil in the details, they knew there's something there about this gathering Israel. There's something there about these lost 10 tribes. And then we understood it more as we read Isaiah and the hyperbole.
Well, the term I use for all that is multiple working hypotheses, right? because Orson Pratt had his ideas, Brigham Young had his ideas, let's say Wilford Woodruff had ideas. So the brethren have always had their own ideas, and they're almost parallel. They say, well, I think this, I think that. Matt Harris gave some examples of that too, the differing opinions about communism, for example.
Right.
And they're working hypotheses until you get additional information and experience. Then you shed the ones that aren't as viable, and you keep iterations of that until you approach the truth closer and closer.
Absolutely. And I love that. And I love that that you point that out, that well, let's get started. So I want to start with reframing Joseph's no, sorry. Let me go back to, I want to start with reframing the plates.
Okay.
It's interesting. I got notes here. It's interesting how both the plates and the seer stone narrative, the Urim and Thummim versus seer stone narrative, and geography have both caused people to stumble in the church with their faith. It's crazy. When we taught the Urim and Thummim, it was like, okay, that's how he translated, and people gained a testimony of that. For some reason, the seer stone thing was kooky, and the same with the geography. Anyway, I just wanted to add that. We're not talking about that. But let's start with the translation. Where
you said you want to start with the plates or the translation?
I mean the plates. Sorry.
Okay.
Wait. No. Let me. Oh no, with the plates. Yes, and then we'll get into translation.
Okay.
Why is it important for us to? Why the two plates? Why are the two sets of why are the two sets of plates important? Why was it important for you to talk about that?
Okay, there's partly because there were a lot of, let's say, open-ended issues in church history that didn't make sense. And so let me just explain what the two sets of plates is. I know we talked about it before, but just for the people who haven't seen that before. So the idea is that and I could pull up a graphic if you want, or you could insert one showing
yes, I will.
My diagram. Okay. And so the idea was that in the stone box that Moroni built, he put the abridged plates. And we could tell that from the title page, which explains what was inside the set of plates. And that was an abridged record of the Nephites, an abridged record of the Jaredites, and then Moroni sealed it with his own writings at the end. That's all was in there.
Okay.
And so when Joseph went and got those plates, he had a set of abridged plates, which he at one point called the original Book of Mormon. He took that down to Harmony, Pennsylvania, and the first part he translated was the Book of Lehi, which Martin Harris lost, 116 pages. And then Oliver Cowdery came down. They finished the translation all the way to the end, and they were planning to go back to translate the Book of Lehi. This is in DNC 10. It talks about this. And the Lord said, no, don't retranslate that. Instead, you have to translate the plates of Nephi. And the key point to understand is at that point, Joseph didn't have those plates of Nephi because those were original plates. They weren't part of the abridgment. And so when they left, well, Joseph's mother explained that one day they put on the Urim and Thummim to look on the plates. And instead of having the translation, he received a commandment to contact David Whitmer and ask him to come pick him up. And he had never met David Whitmer, but Oliver Cowdery said, oh, I know him, so I'll ask him. Oliver wrote the letter to him.
Just to let you guys know, I'm not ignoring him looking at some message. I'm following along with the book here.
You've got on the Kindle, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the point is that when they left Harmony, Joseph gave the abridged plates to what he called a divine messenger. And later he identified him as one of the three Nephites. On the trip to Fayette from Harmony, David Whitmer reported that they met this messenger who had the plates. And David asked him if he wanted a ride because they were going up to Fayette. And the guy said, no, I'm going to Cumorah. And David Whitmer remembered that was the first time he ever heard the word Cumorah because, of course, he hadn't read the Book of Mormon yet. And so the messenger was taking the abridged plates to Cumorah. And when I read that account, that used to be in our institute and seminary manuals, by the way.
Right.
I had that in my seminary class. This whole account was part of the curriculum.
We taught it on our mission too.
Yeah, I know. And it's been deleted now. It's not even in the Saints book.
There were primary songs.
I know.
Joseph going to Cumorah to get the plates. I can't remember, but I remember the primaries.
There was a primary song about Cumorah. Anyway, so this messenger is, according to what he told David Whitmer, he was going to Cumorah. So I started wondering, well, why would he be taking the plates to Cumorah before he went to Fayette? It didn't make sense to me until I realized that he had the abridged plates. He was going to Cumorah to get the plates of Nephi that Joseph had to translate in Fayette. And then that answered all kinds of questions in church history. And so that's why I think it's important for people to understand.
Well, let me read real quick. Let me read this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So he's got the table 2, and I'll have it up here. Old narrative. Yeah. When you say old narrative, we're talking about what scholars are saying today, right?
Well, or what they've been saying all along, actually, in this case.
But they weren't always saying it all along. That's what I'm saying. When we were kids, they weren't saying this.
Yeah, well, this particular one they were, because we always believed there was only one set of plates.
Okay, the reframe is what I'm getting this mixed up. The reframe is what they're saying now.
No, okay. I'm glad
I
you
thought
brought this
the
up,
reframe was what you were alleging.
The reframe is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The old narratives I have faithful and critical in this case.
Okay, right. Okay, so here's the old narrative, faithful. This is the good stuff, right? The good stuff.
Okay.
Well, what we think is the good stuff and what maybe you think is the good stuff. There was only one set of ancient gold plates, and Joseph got them from Moroni's stone box. That's what we were taught.
That's what we
growing
all thought.
up. Yep. Okay. Or the critical from the critics or even the scholars, which I like your Ezra Tabb Benson quote, but I'm not going to get sidetracked that you sent me. You've got, there's a fine line between critics that leave the church and those who have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. But anyway, critical. There were never any authentic ancient plates because witnesses gave inconsistent descriptions. Really? They teach that? Wait a minute.
Well, that was one of the early objections.
That there were no plates at all?
Oh, lots of critics say there were no plates.
Oh, I thought you meant what LDS scholars are teach. Okay.
No.
Okay.
So this is good to clarify this. So the faithful narrative, there was one set of gold plates, right? The critics were saying there were never any plates.
Oh, I see.
And that means critics anciently, not anciently, but critics in 1830 through the modern day say there were never any gold plates.
So when you say critical, you're talking about anti-Mormons.
Right.
When you say faithful, you're just labeling that from our own camp.
Yeah.
People from our own camp.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
All right. So here's the reframe. There were 2 sets of plates, the abridged plates in Moroni's stone box that Joseph translated in Harmony, Pennsylvania, and the original plates of Nephi from the repository in the hill Cumorah that Joseph translated. That's a lot. Fayette, New York. Yeah.
But it's a real simple concept that Joseph translated 2 different sets of plates. One was the abridged plates that he got from the stone box, the narrative we've all heard. And the second was the plates of Nephi that he got from this messenger who picked him up in the repository in the hill Cumorah. So it's a real simple concept. And what makes it fascinating is a lot of people don't realize that the Book of Mormon we have today starts with First Nephi. It's the last Joseph translated. A lot of people, Joseph started with translating First Nephi and went all the way through the book.
Right.
But in the Book of Mormon we have today, the earliest part that was translated was the Book of Mosiah. He translated Mosiah through Moroni in the title page down in Harmony, Pennsylvania. Then he translated First Nephi through at least the first part of the Words of Mormon in Fayette. So even though the Book of Mormon's in chronological order, it's not in the order that it was translated.
Right. Okay.
And once people understand that, then the two sets of plates thing makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay, because I got confused. This is something could you tell I got confused?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm
No,
sorry.
that's helpful for me.
My wife and I read this. I know, but everyone that's understanding, I might edit this part. Everyone that's understanding is like, Troy, you don't understand what he's saying. My wife and I read this together. I always thought the good narrative was the faithful narrative.
It is.
That's the one we like.
Well, that's the old narrative, the traditional faithful narrative that we all grew up with.
But you're saying the reframe is what we should believe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there's nothing inherently wrong with the old faithful narrative. That's what we all grew up with, that there's the golden plates, right? One set of plates.
But proving that there's two sets of plates shows us what? Just say it one more time.
Okay, it explains several things, but it partly explains why the messenger went to Cumorah before he went to Fayette.
Okay.
In fact, that is such a problem for traditional scholars that Jack Welch changed the church history when he wrote his book Opening the Heavens to omit this. He says, in fact, I have it around here somewhere, but he has this book called Opening the Heavens, where he accumulated all the accounts of from the early days of the translation and origin of the Book of Mormon. And he deleted this part because it doesn't fit his narrative. So he just outright deleted it. And as we mentioned earlier, they deleted it from the Institute and Seminary manuals, even though it's well attested. It was even in Joseph F. Smith and I think Orson Pratt interviewed David Whitmer and included this account in their formal report to the Quorum of the 12. And yet now nobody in the church ever hears about it because it's been deleted from the history.
So why don't the scholars want to believe that today?
I'm not sure. I know it's a real problem.
Is that the two Cumorah thing? Is that because of the...
Yeah, I think that's why Jack Welch did it. Why he just omitted it.
Okay.
From otherwise. And as far as why the Saints book and the Institute manuals deleted it, that's hard to say, but I think it comes back to the Mesoamerican theory.
Right.
That's because their whole contention is that the Hill Cumorah is in southern Mexico. But if the messenger went over to the Hill Cumorah to get the plates of Nephi, that means the repositories in New York, and their whole theory doesn't work.
Right. Okay.
So they have to change church history to accommodate their theory of geography.
Okay.
But there's other reasons why this is important. So let me give you a couple more examples.
Yeah, go for it.
One is the 8 witnesses that handled the plates that Joseph showed them. None of them ever said there was a sealed portion, right?
No.
And so that sounds like it contradicts what the 3 witnesses saw, because they said there was a sealed portion, and Joseph Smith said there was a sealed portion. The 8 witnesses said they handled the pages and all that. None of them ever said there was a sealed portion. So that's another indication that they were talking about 2 different sets of plates. Another is that Joseph Smith's father said he weighed the plates and they weighed 30 pounds, where other people said they weighed 60 pounds. So they couldn't be talking about the same set of plates. That's why I think the 8 witnesses saw the plates of Nephi.
Interesting.
And the 3 witnesses...
Because it wasn't important for them to see both sets, as long as they saw a set.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Okay.
Right.
I'm getting it now. I'm getting it.
And another
that was the part I didn't quite understand, because Andrea's reading it to me, because it's an easy read, but I know you're trying to condense a whole bunch of information into a very short read.
Yeah. Well, I do have, if you look at the figure 4, it's a little further down, but it's a diagram that shows the sets of plates.
Mm-hmm.
So this should be the page from the book, right? Can you see that okay?
Yep. That's exactly the page from the book.
Let me zoom it into about 150 or so. Okay, so here you can see the 2 sets of plates, right? So in the repository, which Mormon talked about, that he had taken all the plates from the Hill Shim and moved them to Cumorah. That included the brass plates, plates of Lehi, large plates of Nephi, the plates of Ether, and the small plates of Nephi, okay? All that stuff was in there. But then in Moroni's stone box that he built on the Hill Cumorah, he put the abridged plates. And so it's a abridged record of the people of Nephi, the abridged Ether, Moroni's original plates, and then the sealed portion from Ether, which we don't know much about.
Now, when you
But
say current, you're talking about the current narrative.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by current?
Well, what do you mean current?
Right here. Oh, you can't see my mouse.
Oh, current. Okay. Yeah,
Sorry.
current. No. Okay, the last box. Yeah, I was going to get there. Current means the Book of Mormon as it is today.
Oh, okay.
So if you have a Book of Mormon, I have one here as an example. If you open up the Book of Mormon, it starts with the small plates of Nephi, right?
Yes.
So that's how it is today. But that was the last part that was translated. So what I'm showing here is the original plates were in the repository. Moroni's box had the abridged plates, and that's what Joseph translated in Harmony. Then in Fayette, Joseph had the small plates of Nephi that came directly from the repository. And when he translated those, he put those first in the Book of Mormon today, the current Book of Mormon.
Okay.
And that's how this all flows.
So my question to you would also be, did we ever believe in a two-plate thing?
Not that I know of.
But
I mean, Joseph Smith alluded to it, and it's right in the Doctrine and Covenants. Here's another example. So in the Pro Great Prize, Joseph Smith history, Joseph says he returned the plates to the messenger by prior arrangement. But Brigham Young said he returned the plates to the Hill Cumorah. So there's another discrepancy. But it makes sense if you realize that he was talking about the abridged plates that he returned to the messenger, as we saw from the David Whitmer account. And he was talking about the plates of Nephi that he and Oliver returned to the repository in Cumorah.
Okay.
So Brigham Young and Joseph Smith were both accurate, but they were talking about two different sets of plates.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another one of those discrepancies in church history that's easily resolved once you understand there's two sets of plates.
Okay.
Sealed portion, it refers to the part of the Book of Ether that Moroni specifically told Joseph Smith,
right.
Don't translate that at this time. And that was included in the abridged record that was in the stone box. That's why Moroni had to tell him, don't translate this part.
Right. Okay.
But the plates of Nephi, it gets the terminology gets complicated because we read about the plates of Nephi in different ways. There were the large plates of Nephi, which was kind of like the chronological records of the people that Mormon abridged. And then we have the small plates of Nephi, which was Nephi's personal record. And so when we talk about plates of Nephi, when you read DNC 10, it just refers to the plates of Nephi. It doesn't say large or small.
But
so we have to.
But I've heard scholars talk about abridged plates and smaller. Well, we know that Mormon abridged the plates. I get that.
Right.
But what I'm saying is the term small plates and large plates, that's a term that scholars use today.
Yeah, that's always been that.
But what you're saying is there were two different visits and there were two different, which made the plates. There were two different places where plates were retrieved.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. There were two different sets of plates that Joseph translated. They weren't all combined in one.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense.
If Martin Harris had not lost 116 pages, we never would have had the small plates because they weren't part of the original Book of Mormon.
Okay.
And I like to compare this. Let's say that Martin, instead of the 116 pages, let's say he had lost the manuscript for the King Benjamin's sermon. Then the messenger could have gone to the repository and got the original account of that and given it to Joseph to translate. So it's kind of like a backup on your hard drive for your computer. No matter what Martin Harris or Joseph Smith, anybody lost, there was a backup in the repository.
Okay. Yeah.
And I love this because it makes, there's a lot of discussion about naturalistic versus supernaturalistic explanations for the Book of Mormon. And the pure naturalistic means that Joseph or someone else composed it, right? The pure
Right.
supernatural is that it all came from a seer stone. Joseph just read words that showed up on the seer stone. And neither one of those are plausible to me. So when I look at it, I think there's very naturalistic elements of this. He had to have physical plates, had to have the Urim and Thummim. The plates had to exist, in the real world, had to actually been recorded by ancient prophets and all that. But there was a supernatural element of using the Urim and Thummim to translate the engravings on the plates. So both of those elements were a part of it.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that right now. Do you have anything?
Okay.
Is there any more we want to talk about this, about the plates?
No, I think that covers
Okay.
it.
You know what? I
your
feel so
listeners-
embarrassed though, because my wife and I gleaned over that chapter. I thought I understood it, but it's something I need to read over again.
Well,
So,
let me.
I'm sorry
just
if I'm
explain.
still like a deer in the headlights about
I'm
it.
glad you brought it up because the point of this book, The Rational Restoration, is sort of an introduction to all these concepts.
Okay.
And the book about the two sets of plates is called Whatever Happened to the Golden Plates.
Oh, well, there we go.
It's a whole book that explains all this in a lot more detail with all the references and so on.
Okay.
So in the book you're reading, it's just a summary. And I can see, listening to you trying to understand it, it helps me to figure out, well, maybe I didn't explain it clearly.
No, you did. And
No,
everyone.
I don't think I did, because it's an ongoing thing. People ask me about this all the time. And when I do a whole presentation on it, or when they read the whole book, then it kind of makes sense.
Am I the only one that gets mixed up between the sealed portion and the? Okay.
No, not at all.
All right. Well, it's good stuff though, and I'll read it over again. So I'm sorry, folks. If for those of you that catch on like that, you're just probably
Yeah.
forward through that. No.
Yeah, don't worry about it, because it's helpful for people to understand. And it's for me by now, it's such a simple concept. When the first idea came to me, I thought, okay, this explains everything. But I had been thinking about these issues for a long time. So when the solution appeared, it just put everything in place.
Yeah.
But people who haven't thought about the problems with the plates, this is all new to them. And that's why Richard Bushman has a new book called Joseph Smith's Gold Plates. And he talks about this idea of the two sets of plates in there also. And that's probably the first place most people will hear about it.
Does Bushman believe that possibly there were two sets of plates?
Well, I don't know what he believes, but in his book, he pointed it out as a viable explanation.
Because there's dialogue. There's
all the evidence that I mentioned here,
right,
as well as more. So, one of the ongoing problems in the church's explanation and the scholarly explanation of the plates is, where were the plates of Nephi? Because Joseph said the last leaf of the plates was the title page, and he translated that before he translated the plates of Nephi. So why would he have translated the title page before he translated the plates of Nephi if the plates of Nephi were in the set of plates?
Yeah.
You have scholars trying to depict, well, where exactly in these plates were they? But once you realize there were two different sets of plates, then there's no issue anymore.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense.